I've had my service dog, Max, for years. He isn't just a pet, he's my lifeline, my calm in chaos, and legally protected under federal law.
People don't get that sometimes.
Entitled HOA neighbors, for example.
Karen.
She was always loud, always watching, always ready to argue. I kept my distance, but I never imagined she'd cross a line like this. Not until one sunny afternoon, when I let Max play in our small backyard. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, when I heard it. A sharp hiss, followed by barking and Max yelping. I ran around the corner just in time to see Karen holding a spray bottle, smirking. My heart dropped. She had sprayed Max with something. Water?
No.
It stung his eyes. His fur was soaked with chemical residue. Max yelped and ran under the deck, frightened. I shouted at her, furious. "What the hell are you doing?" She laughed. "He's just a dog. Your HOA rules don't matter here." I froze for a moment, rage building. This wasn't about rules. This was federal law. Service animals are protected. Hurting one intentionally?
Criminal.
I dialed the cops immediately. While on the line, Karen tried to backtrack. I didn't spray him. It was water. You're overreacting. I ignored her and stayed on the phone. She kept pacing, looking from the yard to the street. That's when her expression shifted. The moment the dispatcher said, "Ma'am, this is a federal offense. A service animal is protected under federal law," her confidence faltered. She froze. Literally. Her mouth opened, then closed. Hands shook slightly. She hadn't expected this escalation. She thought I was alone in enforcing neighborhood rules. She didn't realize she had crossed a federal line. By the time the cops arrived, she was trying to explain herself. Her voice shook, stumbling through excuses. I handed over Max's service dog ID and documentation. They looked at her, looked at the proof, and started taking notes. Her smirk had disappeared completely. After she left with a formal warning and a clear federal violation note, Max sat by my side. I stroked his head, whispering, "It's okay, buddy. They'll learn." It was clear. Karen didn't understand consequences. She thought entitlement and intimidation worked. But she just learned that some rules, federal ones, don't bend. After the first incident with Max, I assumed the warning from the police would be enough. It wasn't. I should have known better. Karen thrives on ignoring boundaries until she's forced to face consequences. For the next few days, I kept Max inside whenever she was around. I double-checked the yard gates, ensured nothing she could reach, and even had my cameras recording 24/7. I thought I was prepared. But Karen is relentless. It started subtly. She'd lean over the fence while I walked Max, making comments. "Your dog's making too much noise," she'd say. "I don't care if he's a service animal. This yard is loud." I ignored it, recording every interaction, letting her words become evidence. Then one afternoon, I saw her crouched near the yard again, spray bottle in hand. My blood ran cold. She hadn't learned. She was testing me, pushing the limits to see if I'd react in the moment or stay calm. I didn't run out screaming. I didn't try to confront her directly. Instead, I took careful note of everything. Her angle, her actions, her proximity to Max. Every detail would be recorded. I also called the police department, not for immediate intervention this time, but to ensure that they had a record of continued harassment. I emailed all prior complaints, photos of the spray bottle, timestamps for my security cameras, and my service dog's certification. By the time anything escalated, I would have a full, undeniable record. That night, I reviewed the footage from my cameras. Sure enough, Karen had attempted again. She came close to the fence, held the bottle, and even bent down as if preparing to spray Max. But this time, the camera clearly captured her actions, her face, and her intent. I realized that warnings alone weren't enough. She needed an unmistakable lesson, a boundary that couldn't be ignored or misrepresented. And I knew exactly how to do it. I planned the next step carefully. No illegal retaliation. No confrontation. Just proof. Something that would make any future claims she tried to spin impossible. I prepared the yard with subtle barriers. I positioned my cameras for maximum clarity. I made sure Max was safe at all times, knowing she would escalate if she saw any opportunity. The goal was documentation and justice, not vengeance. Meanwhile, her confidence grew. She seemed oblivious to the severity of her actions. "It's just a dog," she'd mutter to herself. "Nothing will happen." She didn't understand that harming a service animal isn't just a misdemeanor, it's a federal offense. And that kind of law doesn't bend for entitlement. I also spoke with neighbors quietly. They had noticed her lingering, her sneaky attempts to intimidate me, and some even witnessed her carrying the spray bottle. Their statements could corroborate my evidence if necessary. By the end of the week, I felt prepared. If she tried again, she would be caught red-handed. Her entitlement and ignorance would be exposed on camera. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting Max, enforcing the law, and teaching someone who thought she was untouchable that there are limits she cannot cross. After days of careful planning, I knew what had to be done. Karen had crossed every boundary, ignored repeated warnings, and jeopardized Max's safety. This wasn't about petty revenge anymore. It was about protecting a service animal and enforcing the law. I spent the morning preparing. Max was kept safely indoors, away from the yard. I double-checked all security cameras, ensuring coverage of every angle: the fence line, the front yard, the backyard, and the side gate. I wanted every movement documented. No ambiguity. No excuses. Then came the critical addition: a harmless deterrent. I purchased a small spray bottle of water mixed with a vivid, temporary, washable dye. It was completely non-toxic, safe for pets, and perfectly legal. The idea was simple. If she tried anything, her actions would be visually recorded and undeniable. The blue dye would leave visible proof on her hands, her clothes, and any equipment she carried. I applied the dye carefully to the side of the fence she normally reached over, where her hand would touch if she attempted to spray Max. It was subtle, almost invisible from a distance, but highly noticeable up close. One touch, and it would transfer unmistakably. I took a moment to calm myself. This was strategic enforcement, not retaliation. I wanted her caught in the act, with evidence that could not be denied. Everything she did next would be recorded. That afternoon, just as predicted, Karen appeared. She strolled toward the yard with that familiar smirk, spray bottle in hand. She looked around, checking the street, the neighbors, and then my cameras, but only briefly. She underestimated them. She didn't know they captured every angle. She crouched near the fence and leaned in. Her hand brushed against the blue-dyed section. Immediately, the vibrant color transferred to her fingers and cuffs. I watched in stunned satisfaction as she froze. She attempted to wipe it on her pants, but it only smeared further. The cameras captured it all in high definition. Then, as expected, she leaned toward the fence again, preparing to spray Max. She didn't notice the live camera feed being recorded. At that moment, I called the local police, not to intervene immediately, but to alert them that a federal violation could occur. Karen glanced around nervously. She realized something was off, but it was too late. Her hands were stained, her intent clearly visible. She knocked frantically on the fence, trying to deny it, but every movement was recorded. I stayed inside, calm and collected, with Max watching me from the window. He was safe, but the situation had escalated to a point where Karen could no longer manipulate it. By the time the police arrived, she was frantic, trying to explain herself. She insisted she had not tried to spray the dog. She claimed she was checking the yard. Her voice trembled, her words inconsistent. The dye on her hands and sleeves contradicted everything she said. The officers examined the footage and the physical evidence. Every step, every reach, every movement was undeniable. Karen's confident demeanor crumbled. She realized she had crossed a federal line and that her entitlement would no longer shield her. This was the turning point. The cameras, the dye, and Max's safety, all perfectly aligned to provide incontrovertible proof. Karen could no longer manipulate the story. Her previous intimidation tactics were useless. She had walked straight into a trap that protected the law, the neighborhood, and my service dog. And she froze. That freeze, when reality hit, was the exact moment I knew she would never attempt anything like this again. Karen didn't waste any time. By the next morning, I noticed her pacing in the street outside my house. She was talking on her phone, her gestures frantic, her hands stained with the unmistakable blue dye. Whatever confidence she had clung to yesterday was gone. The moment she realized the evidence was damning, panic set in. She had called the HOA, complaining that I had trapped her and assaulted her with chemicals. According to her, she was the victim in all of this. Of course, her version of events conveniently left out the repeated warnings, the prior trespassing, and the federal protections on service animals. Within minutes, the police arrived. 2 officers stepped out of their cruiser, professional, calm, and neutral. They approached me first, and I handed them my full documentation: Max's service dog certification, previous complaints, video footage from my cameras, and photos of her blue-stained hands and sleeves. Every detail was organized, time-stamped, and easy to follow. Karen saw the officers reviewing the evidence and froze instantly. That confident, entitled posture disappeared. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form coherently. She gestured wildly, her explanations contradicting everything the footage clearly showed. One officer asked calmly, "Ma'am, did you enter this property without permission?" She hesitated.
Stammered.
I was just checking the yard. Checking the yard, the officer repeated, his tone steady. At 2:14 p.m. yesterday, and again at 10:30 a.m. today, correct? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands shook slightly. The blue dye on her cuffs and purse left no room for misinterpretation. I watched as her excuses fell apart. Her credibility was gone, shredded by clear, undeniable proof. The officers didn't argue, didn't threaten. They just documented, informed her of her violations, and explained the federal implications. Harming or attempting to harm a service animal is a federal crime, punishable by fines and, in extreme cases, imprisonment. Karen tried to argue, to claim it was an accident, to shift blame. But the dye, the video, the previous reports, and Max's certification were immovable facts. Every excuse she offered bounced off reality. The police issued her a formal warning, emphasizing that any further attempts to harass or harm Max would lead to immediate federal charges. They even took statements from neighbors who had witnessed her lingering near my property, reinforcing the pattern of harassment. Her body language told the story better than her words ever could. She was furious, humiliated, and powerless. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Entitlement has limits, and crossing legal boundaries has consequences. By the afternoon, the HOA contacted me with a carefully worded apology. Karen's authority in the neighborhood was officially revoked. She was no longer allowed to act in any HOA capacity. Her credibility among neighbors had collapsed completely. Yet, the most satisfying moment wasn't the paperwork or the apology. It was the knowledge that she had been exposed, her repeated disregard for boundaries documented permanently. She had underestimated me, underestimated the law, and underestimated Max. And now she couldn't recover her dignity or authority, no matter how hard she tried. Finally, the street felt quiet again. The tension that had plagued the neighborhood dissolved. Max wagged his tail as I brought him inside, safe and unbothered. The cameras continued recording, but now they were only capturing the piece of a home reclaimed, a line drawn clearly and permanently. Karen had tried to manipulate, intimidate, and challenge the law, and failed spectacularly. The lesson was clear. Crossing federal protections, especially when a service animal is involved, carries immediate, undeniable consequences. After the police intervention, the neighborhood felt different. The tension that had haunted my property for weeks finally lifted. No more lingering glances, no more whispered complaints from neighbors, and most importantly, no more threats to Max. My service dog, who had been on edge whenever Karen was around, finally relaxed. The moment he curled up beside me on the couch, tail wagging slowly, I knew the ordeal was over. Karen, meanwhile, faced consequences she couldn't ignore. Her actions had been documented clearly on video, her hands and clothes stained with the unmistakable blue dye, and corroborated by witness statements from neighbors. The police made it clear any further harassment or attempts to harm a service animal would result in immediate federal charges. For someone who thrived on intimidation and entitlement, this was a reality she had never faced. Within days, the HOA officially removed her from any position of authority. Her previous power in the neighborhood evaporated almost overnight. The emails and warnings she had once used to assert dominance became meaningless, and her reputation among the neighbors collapsed. People began talking quietly about the blue paint incident, sharing their own observations of her pattern of harassment. Her credibility was shattered. Interestingly, Karen didn't attempt to regain control. She avoided interactions, kept to herself, and eventually moved away. A for sale sign appeared in front of her home, signaling her departure. It was a silent acknowledgement of defeat. She had tried to intimidate, manipulate, and escalate, but in the end, the law, documentation, and preparation worked in my favor. I didn't feel gloating satisfaction, only relief. Max was safe. My home was secure. The cameras remained in place, not as weapons, but as guardians. I realized that setting boundaries, staying calm, and following the law meticulously was far more effective than confrontation. Karen's entitlement had met an immovable wall: preparation, evidence, and legality. Neighbors returned to normal routines, with some commenting privately on how quickly Karen's authority crumbled once she faced consequences. They observed how calmly I had handled the situation, noting that patience and proper documentation prevented escalation while keeping everyone safe. It became a quiet lesson to the entire community: entitlement only works when others allow it. Looking back, the blue paint was more than just a deterrent. It was a symbol of boundaries, consequences, and the importance of standing firm in the face of repeated harassment. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about accountability. Karen learns that ignoring rules, harassing others, and threatening a service animal carries consequences she couldn't control. Months later, life returned to a peaceful rhythm. Max continued his duties without interruption. The yard, once a scene of stress, became a place of calm. The cameras recorded only serenity now, the echoes of Karen's failed attempts fading into memory. Occasionally, neighbors would stop by to compliment Max or to share stories about their own encounters with entitled individuals, but none of those moments carried the anxiety that had once dominated the neighborhood. In the end, this situation reinforced a vital lesson: protection of rights, careful documentation, and calm enforcement are more powerful than confrontation. Karen's reign of entitlement had ended, and it was clear to everyone, including her, that crossing federal protections, especially those involving service animals, was not something to be taken lightly. Max settled beside me once more, and I let out a long breath. The house, the yard, and the neighborhood were finally mine again, secure, peaceful, and free from unwarranted interference. And as I watched Karen's final departure from the community, I understood something fundamental: boundaries matter. And when they are enforced thoughtfully and legally, even the most entitled people learn that some rules simply cannot be ignored.